In case anyone's confused, the good-looking one is Dave Pollin, and the other guy's Rob. You know, it's said that the closest distance between two people is laughter, and I'd agree with that, but it's a tie with Cornell. I kind of feel like when we're here, we're home, and I really appreciate you inviting us up here to share some of our thoughts and insights. And we are not going to PowerPoint you to death. Yes, we have some slides, and yes, you're going to have to look at them because that's the direction you're facing. But we're going to stop and ask you guys to ask us questions. And raise your hand, please, if you want to interrupt us while we're talking. But you're not here just to hear us go stream of consciousness. You're here to get out of this what's important to you. So please know that we believe that you guys are driving the agenda here. Stop us when you want to talk about something. So I'll just start by saying, imagine yourself driving up Interstate 95. You have a hotel site that just started construction, maybe a mile off the interstate. Got the site work done, silt fences up. And about 20 miles behind you, you've got another hotel, which is $600,000 over budget. And as you look at your bank statement, you got about 10 grand in there. And the hotel that's under construction, so it's about to open, the first one you're doing, looks like it's going to open up and fall flat on its face. So the market down there is tanking. So as you drive by the hotel under construction that's closer to you and that is just starting, the thought is, crap, I got to put my blinker on, get off the interstate, and get the construction guys off there before this thing really takes us down the tubes. Or you keep going, which I did in this case, and I ended up in Rob's parents' offices, and we were laying on our backs on the conference room floor. I don't know if we were crying or not, but I literally was like, God, I'm glad there's no firearms around here because I know what I would do with one. And that seems to be where we are about every 3 or 4 years in this industry. And so you really have to love it. And when I come back to the PowerPoint comment, what I'm going to show you now is just some background about us. You may have seen some of these in the information that you saw if you went on our website or materials that were circulated, et cetera. So I'll let you look at that for 1 second. And the answer was we did continue on with that second hotel, and that is what started the rocket ride for us. We're very fortunate because we've been in the Mid-Atlantic, which is arguably the best real estate sector in the country, starting in '93 when things really started to take off, coming out of the 1990 recession. So very, very fortunate. And let's get started on that presentation.
So I met Dave freshman year, a couple weeks before our semester started. We played football together, and I'd heard that Dave was Pollin. There's a very famous businessman in D.C., A. Pollin, who, as it turns out, was Dave's uncle. So there's a lot different when you're the nephew versus the son. The son has lots of capital, the nephew has very little capital. So that was the beginning, that was the first flaw in our relationship, was I should have met Dave's cousins. You know, that would have been a lot better to help propel us. But and all joking, Dave is the brightest of the family, and that end of the day triumphed all. So we met when we were 18 years old. We started the business in '94, '95, and we've been partners since then. And I was saying earlier today at lunch, one of the great things about our relationship is that we get along the best when things are the toughest. And that is a true testament of any relationship, especially in the real estate business.
Yeah, well said, well said. So we were both attracted to each other because we both played football and shared some of the qualities of athletes and team and never give up, that kind of stuff. But also, interestingly, both of our grandparents were immigrants, so we're second or third generation Americans. Both of them came to this country speaking no English. Both of them became plumbers. Both of them started their own plumbing business. Both of them became developers. So that's kind of odd, right? So we naturally had a good rapport going. And just a quick note. My father got into the hotel business by accident. He said, this would probably be a good place for a hotel. It was on a new interstate that was being built on the East Coast, and it turned out fine. But the story was, he's a multifamily guy at the time. This is 1961. And 2 weeks before the hotel opens, the management company goes bankrupt. So he's like, oh, crap, who's going to operate this thing? I guess I better figure it out. So he did. So I grew up working in his hotels. He has 3 properties on the West Coast now. So when you're 12 years old and your dad owns the hotel, you're kind of the little prince. And so I would ride along in the van, and I just thought it was great. Like, this industry is so glamorous. So when I turned 15, school's over, And my dad says, instead of going to tennis camp this summer, you're going to work for me. So of course I'm like, well, of course I'll wear my suit, I'll go in and boss people around, I'll tell them what to do, I'll have my buddies over, it'll be fun. We marched right in at 5:30 the Monday after school's out, and all my friends are going on vacation. 5:30 in the morning, go into the kitchen, and I said, well, maybe I'll be a chef, that's fine, I'll learn to cook, and this things. No, right into the dish area. $3.35 an hour, 10-hour days, and my supervisor is what today we call mentally challenged. So I really learned from that point on that it is not a glamorous industry, that it takes the labor of tons and tons of really dedicated, wonderful people to make it work. And I've done every crappy job in the industry, of which there are many, many. So I think that was a great way to actually learn the industry from the ground up, gave me credibility, et cetera.
So my family, they started as a small plumbing contractor, and then they grew to a large sheet metal contractor in the Philadelphia region. My dad had a few small flex office buildings that he developed, and so my interest in the business started when I was little. My dad, immigrant mentality, worked 7 days a week, still works literally 7 days a week. So I would go out on the weekends. Childcare for me was tagging along with him because they couldn't afford, any childcare. So that's what I did. After school, I would go to job sites. And so what happened was I, spent most of my summers working construction, and then and that's what really, I think, developed my interest in becoming a developer. I thought about becoming an architect. Honestly, I was probably not bright enough to get any architectural school, certainly not the one in Cornell, and that's how I ended up as a real estate developer.
So we got started in '93. I actually quit my job and moved to DC, but that was more just trying to figure out what we're going to do, doing research, and I came from a consulting group called Laventhal and Horwath, which most of you have never heard of. Went out of business shortly after I got there. I don't think it's correlated, though. Anyway, so I just remember I was in my townhouse in Old Town Alexandria, and because of the regulations, you couldn't have an air conditioning unit on the street because it's a historic district. So I was in my office, which really was the living room, dining room, family room, kitchen kind of thing. And it got so darn hot in that room that I actually had to take off my clothes. So I was in my boxers and my t-shirt, and tourists were walking by trying to peek in and like, who is that guy? But I remember talking to like lenders and family and friends, investors, like, this thing is going to be terrific. We have this great vision for this deal. You should join us. And I was literally like dripping sweat in my boxers, in the middle of the summer in Alexandria. So that was the glamorous start to my career.
And I was living in New York City. Dave had convinced me over the year or two prior to go into business together. I couldn't get a job on Wall Street when I graduated in 1990. It was similar to graduating, a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. There just was no jobs for someone of my GPA. So what I did was I got a job as a real estate broker, and I literally would cold call people most of the day, try to lease space. I then responded to an ad in the New York Times back when you would send it in the mail. I went and interviewed for a job with the New York City Economic Development Corporation. It was a great job. I worked on the developments now, which are Metrotech in Brooklyn, most of what is now today 42nd Street in Manhattan. And I learned a ton from working with other developers, mostly family developers in Manhattan and Brooklyn. The business started me after work at the EDC. We would talk about different things that Dave had researched during the day, and the first deal that we did was a small 40,000 square foot flex building right by the Philadelphia airport. And literally, I think I left my job, and you'll see there the brick building. I left my job and then started a week later. We got a small loan from a bank called Wilmington Trust. We raised, I think, $100,000 of friends and family. I think Dave and I collectively at the time had $10,000, and that was our launching pad.
So the reason, well, you may be asking, I'm hoping you're asking, why are you in Wilmington and you in DC? Obviously it makes sense with the food groups, right? Because I went to hotel school and this family had an office background, but the reason we decided to do this because we were both sitting, again, good friends now, decided to go into business together. We're sitting in the interior designer's office in Washington, D.C. on our first hotel, which you can see up on the screen. And they presented the blue scheme and the green scheme. And as you know, in design, it's not like there's a right answer. So the steakheads that we are, we almost come to blows. I think you like the green, I like the blue. And we're like, you know what? there's more than one right answer to this stuff. So why do both of us need to be involved in every aspect of it? So that's when we decided to kind of divert our focus, me to hotel, Rob to the non-hotel stuff. And because I had a Washington background, Rob's family been in Wilmington several generations, that's what it made sense for us to end
So
up.
I lived in New York City, and then we would go down to the various areas in Pennsylvania and Maryland and Virginia during the week. And then we looked at a bunch of deals in New York City, but actually we never did our first deal in New York until I actually moved out. So we did our first deal a few months after I moved back to the Philadelphia area.
All right, so we're just,
yeah,
Crystal.
Can you talk about some of the challenges of raising capital for your first deal? I know you had some personal feelings,
Yeah.
can you speak to that part of it?
Well, I was going to tell a story about the hotel, which jumps right onto that subject. So moving to Washington, D.C., where Rob alluded to my family having some kind of presence and visibility, it made sense for me to work with my uncle, again, the owner of the time at the Bullets, now the Wizards and the Capitals and Verizon Center. He introduced me to a lot of folks and he said, look, I'm going to help you get your first deal done. So you go out, buy the land, he's telling me, and figure out what kind of hotel you're going to build, and I'm going to build it for you. So I actually was sending him plans, and as I worked with the architect, we'd send him shop drawings and all the things that have to happen in order to get a hotel done. So once we closed on the land, I remember calling on my cell phone, much bigger than this, like, guess what, we got it. He goes, great, come up and see me. So I go into his office, and I said, so your construction guys are ready to build this hotel, right? We bought the land, we got the flag, we have a plan, we know what we're doing. He's like, what are you talking about? So, well, the hotel, remember you said that you were going to build it for me. He's a builder and obviously built Verizon Center, or was MCI at the time. He knew what he was doing. So he said, oh, no. My guys are too busy building the new arena downtown, again, Verizon Center. So you go ahead and build it. So I'm 25, I'm not even handy, and now I'm going to have to build this hotel, and I've never built anything in my life. But the one part, as you suggested, on the capitalization, where it wouldn't have happened without him, was he co-signed the loan. So people in 1994 and 1995, when we were really launching, maybe it feels a little like today, coming out of a recession. There's some optimism, but it's still a time when banks are reluctant to lend. They certainly don't think that new construction is the lowest risk profile that they can get good returns on, et cetera, et cetera. And then the equity came from, as Rob suggested, friends and family. So in this deal, maybe it was, $200,000 of friends and family money, which I went and collected from people who I had a background with. And I certainly encourage everyone to, network not only with their family, but with family friends and associates and colleagues, because that's really where we drew our initial investment money from. But the last thing I'll mention about this hotel, which we still own, and which is still a success for us, thanks to my terrific skills as a general contractor, we went $600,000 over budget on a $4 million hard cost. So it's not what I would recommend to each of you to do on your first deal.
Yeah. And again, especially when at the time the equity was $200,000, so you over budget 3 times the equity. It's not a good multiple. But again, today, if we were to raise the funds today, we would have done the same thing. We would have gone and we would have cobbled together $25,000 investments from various people, and then try to get the bank loan. The bank loan, there's a lot more lenders now in the hospitality sector there were before, so maybe it was easier, maybe not. But again, it would have been friends and family.
Just when you're pushing friends and family, are you approaching that as if they were not family, but like actual investors?
Yeah.
Material as if they were.
Yep. Yeah, but they're not investing in the book. Matter of fact, when we send out investor letters to, again, father-in-law, brother, cousin, it doesn't matter. They don't read it. They're investing with you, period. And they're the people that know you best. So hopefully.
But when, or in '95, when we thought we were going to have to file for bankruptcy, just because we didn't know enough to know that we weren't, we went to my parents that day to say, listen, you invested $50,000 in this project. And my mother yelled, you know how hard it is to make $50,000 after tax? Like, you're not giving up. You have to go and figure this out. Like, there's no negotiation. It's hard immigrant Italian mentality. We thought, we'll just start over again. I'll go get a job at IBM. And that wasn't an option. So you really, at the end of the day, I think friends and family invest on you, not because they're going to lose the money, or not because they read the business plan in detail. They invest in you because they've known you for a long time, and they know that you're a winner, and that you'll somehow figure out how to make this
Where did you get the 600,000?
We borrowed it from the bank.
Well, some of it,
Some of
and then some of it we came from cash flow. But since it was hard to make payroll and the mortgage, I don't even remember how we did it. For the most part. Yeah.
Well, we had huge. I mean, at the time, I remember we were doing this. I think I had $30,000 in credit card debt, and it was. They would send out every month. I would get like Chase would send balance transfer, and you would take your balance from your Bank of America card and transfer it over to Chase, and you get 0% for the first 3 months. And so that's how we lived, really. You know, we were buying supplies for the business. We were buying, chairs for the office in the hotel, and we did a lot of that on credit card. And the reason we were able to pay the debt on the credit card was because of these great 0% transfers. So that was what I would do on Sunday, is research who had the best rates. So.
Oh, this gets better, so
Yeah.
bear with us, bear with us.
It gets better on a bigger scale.
So we've divided up the BPG story into sections and phases. So this is really the end of
We have
phase
a
one.
question
And,
about
please.
We'll always talk about present. Can you talk about actually what the deal told you? Was it a promissory note, an interest rate, or?
That's true. It's true equity in our case. And the thing that we talk about now with folks is we say, look, we're not going to dilute you, take a fee. We're not going to promote you or take a carried interest on your profits, because it's so important in leveraging what we're doing. We can do multiple deals if we have that additional sponsor equity, is now the evolved term that we use today.
So that deal, though, that we've returned since we opened in 96, 95?
96.
96. We've returned almost 10, maybe 15 times the equity.
If I don't mean
yeah,
credit, it's
yeah.
about 800% ROI on that one, on the friends and family. So that's
And we
obviously a
still
pretty
own
good
it.
incentive to go into the next deal, right, if it's working out.
So when you go back to your mom, she says, "You're doing all right. We're really expecting a little more."
She, I think, wants to retire now, so they're not as investors anymore. They're like, you're on your own now. They help you get out, help you get started, just like any good friend or someone that you met along the way. And so we're pretty much on our own now, I'd say.
I'd say so. Yeah, so at the end of each phase, the idea with the strategy is not what strategy do we go in with, but where did we end up? What did we learn? And again, the lessons learned, hopefully there's a tidbit in there, some tiny takeaway that will help you in your career, and if you have any questions about it. But the point number one on lessons learned for me was, and I knew it instinctually, was we had to get the second hotel going, because we weren't sure if the first one was going to turn out. So imagine if the first one opens and is a dud, which it was, you'd never get the second one going for two reasons. One, your track record would suck, and two, you'd be so busy trying to fix the first one. So that was really what got us on the accelerant that we now
You also have to believe, you go back, and Dave uses Laventhal and Harweth background. Really, at the end of the day, it's struggling, but why is it struggling? So rather than just say, okay, we're going to go forward because we're going to go forward, you also go back to your initial analysis and say, okay, this is my underwriting. Why am I not hitting the underwriting? What are the factors? And will you eventually hit your underwriting? It's just going to take more time. And that's what we determined, that we had the right business plan. It just, we were overly optimistic in our hurdles for cash flow.
All right, so phase two, we're established. Now it's time to grow a little bit. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the hotels. And again, we're not going to grind through the bullet points. You can look at them if you like. But the idea was, if you're going to do hotels, there's a couple different ways to go. There's a lot of developers out there that have a management company, and that management company can clean the hotel and check guests in, but probably isn't using sophisticated systems, isn't hiring the best people, maybe isn't as ambitious. The second way to go is what we've chosen to do, build our own operating company. And hotels are a business with a real estate component. It's really not real estate. And then the third way to go, of course, is bring in an independent management company, an Interstate or a Marriott, depending on your strategy there. So we decided that we're going to have our own management company. We brought in another Cornellian who is a co-founder of Pollin Miller Hospitality Strategies, Greg Miller, and we set up outside of the hotel, because we know that if you're in the hotel, again, having the experience, and the phone is ringing or people are trying to check in, you can't run your business, because the day-to-day requirements of the hotel are going to prevent that.
So one of the things that I'm most proud about in our hotel business is we've invested in technology over and over again, and we invested in the people that run the business on a daily basis. So at all times when things are good, or everyone's getting well compensated, but when things turn south, your revenue at the hotel goes down, it means your management fees are going down. The people that take the pay cut are us, and that's something that you really have to think about, because Dave has, at the end of the year, we had a couple thousand employees in that hotel management company, and when payroll has to be made, especially early on, and you have a shortfall, and you don't have, Dave's uncle was his uncle and not his father, you have nowhere to go, so you just take it out of your own salary. So that's something that's very relevant. In terms of the office side, we do the same thing. We own and operate all of our apartment buildings, all of our office buildings, our retail. So if you go in, the engineer of the building is an employee of ours, and the engineer of the apartment, the apartment or the sales staff, a condo, or in an apartment, there are people. We actually started a security company a few years ago, so even the security guards are an entity that's affiliated with us. And again, that gives us incredible control over pricing. We think we operate our buildings 15% less than any of our competitors, and so in a down market, that's really critical.
Yeah, without choice. So we're growing the hotel portfolio at this point. We have the base, right? We decided to build a management company. We have our key people. We're starting to invest in systems. So we get that second hotel I've alluded to a couple times now open, and it takes off 75% occupancy in its first month. That was fantastic. So we start working on acquisitions. We get one done, and then a really cool hotel, the Embassy Suites in Newark, Delaware, which we still own. And this one's near University of Delaware, which has a great hotel program as well. And it's our first institutional hotel deal. Fidelity Investments comes in, $4 million, and everyone knows the name Fidelity. So we think we're really cool. Like, wow, these guys like us. This is cool. This hotel has some compelling investment characteristics, so everything's going well. And we know we don't want to screw this one up. So we start excavation, and the first thing that happens is we hit a huge underground river. We're like, oh, son of a gun. It's just the way of the world. What can go wrong usually will.
So the other thing that Dave should touch on is there is an TGI Fridays that's attached to the hotel. And at the time in the city of Newark, where University of Delaware is, they wouldn't let you the zoning wouldn't allow you to build a freestanding restaurant in this area of the city. So what we did is we had a very small breezeway connected to the hotel. We sold the hotel ground, but we actually couldn't sell it because the city wouldn't let you sell it, because again, back to the ordinances for zoning. So we did a 99-year ground lease. We had the Fridays franchisee pay all that money up front. We used that $1 million as our equity to do the deal with Fidelity. So again, we hadn't recognized any real profits from our previous apartment, our office deal, our hotel deals, so we didn't have a whole lot of money. We had tapped out at the time of friends and family to be in the 2 hotels, so that's how we got creative, and we had the equity to do that. Our second, our biggest office deal, which got us to the next level, was Rollins Trucking was being sold to Penske. We knew through friends, the children, the Rollins family. We were heard the Rollins building was going to be sold. We wanted to get in there before Penske bought it. So as part of the Penske truck leasing acquisition of Rollins, Rollins sold the building to us. And as part of the transaction with Penske, so it wasn't an efficient market at the time. We were able to, under due diligence, get AstraZeneca, which was they have their North American headquarters next door, to lease space up in the building. So when we went to close, we had almost the whole building leased up to AstraZeneca and Syngenta. We brought in a private equity firm from, again, our lack of capital. We brought a private equity firm in Philadelphia, Hubert Adler, and then we leased the building up shortly after acquisition and flipped it 2 years later. Wish all deals were like that.
Yeah, really. So then, phase 2, lessons learned. So, Rob, on the first part.
So, the first part, we the one thing that we had no idea is how hard this business is. I mean, there's so many moving parts, and there's so many things that you need to have attention to detail for, like for example, subsurface issues or engineering issues. And also, when we were growing, we were also worked in the accounting department. So in addition to being a developer, signing on the personal guarantees, we'd also work in the accounting department. And that was something I didn't realize how much time it would take.
The second part about strategy, again, it wasn't what we knew going in, it's what we knew coming out. And the point was the operating companies created a hell of a lot of critical mass and credibility. So if you go sit down with a lender, a hotel company, an investor, and you've got someone sharp leading your operating company who understands the nuance of that market, who's done the due diligence, knows the demand generators, obviously I'm talking about hotels, it is really important. So we felt like that actually was paying more dividends than we'd expected when we first started out. At first, we just wanted to run hotels really, really well and potentially do some third-party work down the road. All right, so this next phase is where it gets really fun. I hope you like relationship management if you wanted to do some of this stuff. So these are the people who have invested, institutional capitalists, not all of them. And then here are some of the lenders that we work with. The point was not to say that we're really cool because we do business with RBS. It's just that's a hell of a lot of effort going into meeting these folks, having them like you, do due diligence on you, and then be ready to work with you. So those are the folks that made it possible for us to do about $500 million of hotel development during this time. I say development, even though some were acquisitions on the list above, those were deep cut renovations, new systems, new roofs, definitely new fixtures, furnishings, and equipment. And so the keys for us were integration of this effort's really hard. We're doing due diligence at the same time we're operating hotels. At the same time, we've got a lot of construction underway. At the same time, the legal effort and the deal structuring effort is underway. So you've got all of these things going on, and at the end of the day, relationship management is still the key. And I just want to tell a quick story. The Madison Hotel in Washington, D.C., it's an iconic building, 15th and M, if you know downtown. We ended up buying it in 2002. Bids were due originally the day after 9/11. So, of course, no bids came in. We're locals. I knew the trustee, so that's how we got our hands on it. But the day we got it under contract and the trustee of the estate that it was owned by told the employees, we walk in as the new ownership and management company. Of course, we hadn't closed yet. So I'm walking in the kitchen, and a cook who sees me, knows who I am, takes a Budweiser and starts drinking it right in front of me as he's flipping the burgers for lunch. And I was like, I am going to fire that son of a bitch as soon as we take this thing over because he's really rubbing my face in it. Can you imagine someone in your business drinking your beer while he's working? It was inconceivable. So as we go through due diligence, and I'm trying to get this guy's name so we can fire him, it turns out the union contract says each cook gets 3 beers per shift, 3 beers in this hotel. It's only 3 beers per shift. And so what would really happen is the alcoholic of the 3 cooks would give the other guys a couple bucks and drink all 9. Well, that's not a healthy environment, I'm going to say. And then the guy's driving home. Plus, he's playing with my $20 steak. That's food costs. Sorry, you were saying.
Hey, you give him knives?
Yeah, sharp knives. So hopefully they're stable.
Gas.
That's right. So the point was that the contract said that, and we kind of think of ourselves as smart operators. So we came up with a strategy, and we sat down with the union. We said, we will trade you a benefit of your choice. Gave them a list if you get rid of this stupid beer requirement. And it basically said, no, stick it. So we said, fine. So the next day, we said, well, the beer is officially O'Doul's. And 3 alcoholic cooks quit the next day. Literally, they just said, we're out of here. So the strategy worked out. But that's a kind of fun puzzle you get to put together when you're in the hotel business.
So in the office business, everyone wants to be value add. So really, what differentiates us from the other 25 developers, 30 developers of our size in the Mid-Atlantic? And what I'm most proud about is our ability to conceptualize very quickly with an architect or a land planner how you could most effectively, meaning best cost, quickest, transform a C building to an A building, B plus building to an A building, B minus building to an A minus. And what we did to do this, which I think differentiates us, is we have our own construction group. So we have 35 people in our construction shop. It's run by a close friend of ours he's been with us now 10 years, 15 years, whose last job was he was a small home remodeler. So he had no experience at all. The last job he did when he wasn't with us was he was renovating a kitchen. But he stepped up to the challenge, and he surrounded himself by lots of people that were more technical than him. And what we've been able to do, and we don't build everything, there's a certain size that we'll bring in, a Turner Construction or a Gilbane, that might be a $40 million project and above, is they're really good at, in a very quick time, figuring out how we can improve these buildings. How can you change the window system? How do you change the HVAC system to make the HVAC system a lot more efficient? How do you change the lobby? And there'll be some pictures I'll show you. So what I think differentiates us as an operator, as a developer, is how quickly and without having too many third-party consultants give us the best product, the quickest turnaround time for the best price. Also, because we operate everything, our engineers from other properties can go into a building and within a few days say, okay, we can reduce our electric consumption by 10%, 15%. If we spend $1 million in a new HVAC system, we have a 3-year payback on electric and gas. So that's, I think, what really helps us, and that's I think our expertise.
These are some of the hotels that were part of our development during that period. And I want to tell a quick story about the Aloft brand. Does everyone here know the Aloft brand? Have you stayed in one or Better Business Plan? Okay. If you don't know, it's the sub-brand to W, just like Courtyard is to Marriott, Aloft is W. So we're thinking, God, people love W hotels, right? That's where we want to stay when we're in New York or LA or Chicago or big cities. So I think people will seek out that experience in the suburbs. If they have to stay at an airport market or in a suburban office market, an Aloft should beat a Courtyard every time, right? You would drive preference. And so we signed up, and we did 3 of them. Well, it turns out that anything you brought to market in 2008 was really going to struggle, and this brand did. But what we didn't realize, because we hadn't made the mistake yet, was Starwood rolling out a select service brand is very different than Marriott or Hilton rolling out a select service brand. Marriott and Hilton are structured to support those. They have critical mass. But more importantly, the Starwood traveler is looking for the Hilton traveler is looking for that select service Hilton brand already. They know Hampton Inn, they know Hilton Garden Inn, they know Homewood Suites. So they didn't know that Starwood would have a property at Dulles Airport because it wasn't something they were trained. So we had not only the challenge for the Aloft brand of coming to market at a tough time, but we had to create awareness for the brand. And the brand still doesn't have critical mass. Not to say it can't or won't be successful long term, and it won't get critical mass. I think it will, and it will. But it was an incredible challenge, and it just seemed so obvious at the time that anyone under 40 years old would much rather stay in a Loft than their counterpart from either Marriott or Hilton. And it turns out that wasn't the case.
So with our construction development expertise, we're able to do large projects where there's less competition. So this is a project in Wilmington, Delaware. It's the riverfront. It's where the Acela train goes through on the way from Philadelphia to Washington, D.C. It's right on 995. That's the highway. We're able to go in and with our expertise, figure out what's it going to cost to remediate the land on a per acre. Here, we estimate it's about $400,000 an acre to remediate it. Who's the best architects based on what we've seen in other markets or in our markets that will create a sense of place? Because ultimately, as we were talking earlier today at the architecture school, a lot of people like a building. They like the lobby. A law firm may like the elevator lobby, but a lot of people don't know why they like the building. And what we have done is we've identified architects, land planners, who are great at, in a cost-effective way, creating places that people like to be and buildings that like to be. So in addition to our construction expertise, we know of a lot of people who are good at, I'd like to say, placemaking. And we chose, rather than to go to San Francisco, LA, Florida, we chose to focus our efforts from New York City to Washington, D.C. And that's we've been doing this again since 1995. that's allowed us to really, over the years, meet many of the corporate real estate executives who run, the Comcast of the world, United Engineers, companies, Baltimore and DC, and also helped us to understand the brokerage markets, who the best brokers are in each of the sub-markets, so that when a broker would come up and say, this is a great piece of property, this is why I think it is, we had a certain trust in the people that would feed us deals. And again, if we were spread out around the country, that would have been much harder to do given our size than the fact that we're in a contained geographic where it's an hour and 45 minutes to New York City from Wilmington, or it's an hour and 45 minutes to Washington, D.C. So we really have a good understanding of all the nooks and crannies in our markets.
This is the riverfront in Wilmington. This is just one submarket in Wilmington, Delaware. And of these projects, we've been involved with most of them, to either develop them or are working on them right now. So just an example of focusing our efforts in one area where we have hotel, office, multifamily, retail, and office. I think it's
we're building, yeah. So here we built the residential. We've got retail, office. We built a grocery anchored 155,000 square foot center. We wanted to do a hotel. The market wasn't working. We just started construction a couple months ago on the West End, and we just finished up on a movie theater. We thought the market would support a movie theater. We did a feasibility study. It showed, and then we reached out to an operator that we knew from Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So we just recently opened a 15-screen IMAX that's doing really well. And that 750,000 projected people that will go, projected attendees that will go to the theater this year will benefit all of the retail that we have here. It's been a great leasing vehicle for our apartments because people will go to the matinee on a Sunday and say, hey, maybe I'll live here. And so what's happened is our investment in that particular asset will prove to be profitable, but it will also increase our occupancies throughout the portfolio down there. And so that's, again, when you talk about synergy, that's a really great example of synergy.
These are some of the other key projects during the period. The building on the left is our co-headquarters in Wilmington. We won an AIA Gold Award. Bob Little, who's a Cornell school architect, designed that one at the time at Kling-Lindquist. These are a couple of the residential buildings along the Wilmington riverfront. And
one of the things that we're proud of is you see the Rivendell. It's a condo, for-sale condo we built in Ocean City, Maryland. And we, again, we didn't really work for anyone before we started our business. We had short careers, so we didn't learn a whole lot of what other people learned through mistakes. So a lot of the mistakes that we've made have been self-inflicted and very costly. And we built a condo in Wilmington, and we had some issues with moisture, water penetration, and so we learned from our mistake. We had no litigation, we caught it in time, but when we went and built in Ocean City, Maryland, we did a great job in construction, and we're the only condo built in this vintage, this 2008-9 vintage, that did not have any lawsuits. So while there was these class action lawsuits or HOA lawsuits on all the other condos, we didn't have any. And that was a big selling feature for us. Is, hey, come to us. We're not getting sued.
The bar sank low.
Yeah.
So again, we'll talk for just a minute on the strategy part, but probably the takeaways were, I'll just mention strategy, and Rob will come back to the lessons learned. But focusing on Wilmington, we had an advantage. So if there was a jump ball on a site we wanted, we won. If there's a jump ball on a tenant, we were going to get that tenant. And we were able to discern patterns of demand and those kinds of things. Same thing on the hotel side. We said, let's not just build one hotel, even in the Mid-Atlantic, in this submarket, another here. So at BWI Airport, for example, we have a Hilton, and a Loft, a Hilton Garden Inn, and a Homewood Suites. It's pretty obvious, one revenue manager can do that as opposed to 4. Really in-depth knowledge of demand generators and patterns and those kinds of things. Focusing on the Mid-Atlantic. Also, if there's a problem, you can get in your car. It's a hell of a lot harder to fly to Phoenix to figure something out because you'll drop 2 balls, while you're on the plane coming back.
And our strategy had been to use, at this particular vintage, was to use as much leverage as possible. So because we had a large staff for lenders that were trying to deploy capital, we were a great stop because we could deploy hundreds of millions of dollars very easily. And so what happened with us, and the lesson learned was the lending community was so lenient that you were buying, or you could buy anything you want, you could build anything you want, because we would go out and within 30 days we'd have loan commitments from several different lenders to do what we wanted to do. The problem was you stopped overanalyzing or analyzing the true economics of the deal, because you were in a bubble market, everything was going up. So if we had just sold 150 units at this condo, why not build another 150 units at the next condo, and let's plan for another 1,000, because it was so easy. And we lost the perspective of taking a step back and say, hey, we're in a bubble. And we knew we were in a bubble. You'd laugh like, oh, this is too easy. And once you lose that perspective, that's when the wheels can fall off. So, but it's hard. And we were saying today at lunch, the Ocean City condo market. Once we started construction there was a landowner across the street. We were on the bay, and the landowner on across the street said, "Hey, I'm about to sell this land to another developer. Why don't you all buy the land and build oceanfront?" And we thought about it, and we said, well, if there's another another condominium that's going to be built right across the street, we should control the market. And we'll have the bayfront community and the oceanfront. But the problem with that is you can control the market, but if the market goes away, you just have two bad projects as opposed to one bad project.
Yep.
And so we started at that point, at Rivendell and Ocean City, we at that point realized, okay, hey, listen, things are really starting to slow down. We don't want any more exposure to any real estate. Let's start bunkering in. And the reason we learned that is because when things start to slow down and you're hands-on and you go into the sales office, whether it's leasing for an office, selling a condo or a townhouse, and you realize if you sit there on a Saturday and the traffic is 1/3 of what it used to be, and the people that are coming in have a high hesitancy, and when you have a handshake to sell a townhouse that used to be worth $350,000, you're going to sell it for $290,000, and then they back away, the prospective buyer at $290,000, even though they're getting a big discount. He was like, oh, I want you to then pay for the real estate taxes, my mortgage. There was just no market there. And I said to Dave, next time this happens, we'll take advantage of the down cycle sooner than we did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll try to short our own stock.
Yeah, sure. Exactly.
All right, there's got to be at least one question, because we are PowerPointing you guys to death. That is not why we're here. Greg.
This goes back to a couple slides ago. You talked about how you grew your hotel brands, and I worked in the industry. It usually takes a long time to start with maybe choice and quality hotels. You work your way up to your mid-tier select service. You do a couple Fairfields or a couple brands. Then you work your way to upper tier select, and then you work into full service. It usually takes longer than 2 years, and you manage to do it very quickly. And I'm curious how we were able to progress so fast.
Yeah, we opened our first hotel, which actually was a Best Western when we developed it, and turned it into a Comfort Inn shortly after.
It was a Best Western because that's the only brand we could get. And we thought, you're from the West Coast.
Yeah, that was a good brand, right?
Yeah, like, I never heard of Best Western. Being from the East Coast,
true.
Just spoke up louder.
But yeah, so and then we broke ground in '97 on the Embassy Suites. But we had a couple advantages. One, we didn't know what we didn't know, and so we came across as confident. And one of the slides that we'll talk about a little bit later is banks don't make money unless they lend money. So there is a strong incentive on the part of the people that you're talking to actually do your deal, right? The bias is actually do the deal because that's how they make money, and if they're institutional equity, that's how they make their carried interest. So on this one, it kind of came together. We bought a site, and we actually thought we were going to do a little restaurant park on it, 3 little restaurants, and Rob had talked about why that was actually a terrible plan. But the site was still good, and we knew we wanted to do a hotel in Delaware because we had the advantage of being a home market for us and having a good knowledge base, and we kind of knew universities made sense. Anyway, had we gone to the Embassy Suites option when it was owned by Hilton, maybe they would have said, not yet, guys, but it was Promise Hotels. So a real hardcore franchising culture. Let's get this done, let's do it. And so that's probably why we were able to jump maybe 1 or 2 steps, because we worked with the Promise guys who we had a relationship with.
And also I think we did a really good job at selling our ability. So we made ourselves sound bigger than we were. Back then, the internet wasn't as, I don't think we had a website, probably. And so you were able to sound more impressive than we really were. Now, that still happens to say, like, listen, I know a few young developers in Philly, and they've been able to grow in the last few years pretty rapidly just because they hustle. I mean, they are hustling every day. They are constantly selling. And at that point in time, we had built the Best Western. We went from Best Western to Choice, and we said, oh, we have a Best Western, so if we have a Best Western, we should be able to get a Comfort Suites. And then the Comfort Suites, we went to Promise and said, hey, we've got 2 hotels. And also, the reason we were able to get the Embassy Suites was this is a great location. So the reason we still own it is at literally the front door to the University of Delaware. And so ultimately, I think, while our sales pitch was great and our track record sounded better than it probably was, the location was ultimately we sold it. And then once we had that location, that opened the door for other health products.
Anything else? Wish we could stop there, but unfortunately, no. So again, you guys are children, and you're not children, of course, but I use the term, we're children of the recession. And so the last 4 years have been a hell of a laboratory. So what do people do?
It would have been easier to stay home and watch CNN. Certainly would have been more profitable.
Would have been more enjoyable. So we feature Anglo-Irish here, just as one component of what we were dealing with. Anglo came over from Ireland in the 90s, and we were their 3rd relationship in the U.S., their 3rd loan in the U.S. They became our biggest lender because they were the guys that said yes, and
great people
and great guys.
Like you want to go out, you want to go out every night with them.
Yeah, and they're smart too. I mean, don't get me wrong; they actually were and are very smart people, and that wasn't the point. And they certainly are not responsible for the GSEs being nationalized and all the other things that happened around them. But so they came over, they became our biggest relationship. We had probably 850 million with them at a certain point. And when the music stopped, we didn't nearly have that much, but we still had a significant relationship with Anglo-Irish. So we said to ourselves, okay, there's some crazy stuff going on there. What the heck are we going to do to capitalize on it? Because we were already going to have to play defense, laying people off, cutting costs wherever we could, working with vendors on all the stuff that instinctively you have to do. So with Anglo, the idea was, and I'll talk about it in a minute, the idea was really communicate. And at the end of the day, they chose only 3 groups to do a global restructuring with before they sold their U.S. loan book. And had that sale happened, and this did happen to a lot of folks, while people were in default on their loans, then the people who bought those loans had the loaded gun to do what they wanted. So even if your asset was performing and you're paying your mortgage, if you had a mature default, i.e. your loan was up, the guy who bought the loan was able to foreclose on you, and there's probably recourse. So anyway, because of that great relationship with Anglo, when they did sell their U.S. loan book, we were actually in a reasonable position.
And so what happened was there's this recession, which was horrific, and you literally just didn't sleep for a couple of years. Because not only do we have to worry about the banks, we have a huge organization of lots of employees and people that depend on their salaries to pay their home mortgages. But what happened was rates went down. So even though the face amount may have been $60 million loan on this particular asset, what happened was a lot of the loans were floating, or the hedge burn off, or the swap burn off. So you went from a 5 or 6 or 7% mortgage all of a sudden to 2% or 2.5%. A lot of our debt was like 200 over LIBOR. Yeah. So you could pay the mortgage because the mortgage was a third of what it historically would be. The monthly mortgage payment would be a third. But there was no liquidity in the market, so you had no ability to refinance, as Dave said. And all the loan documents typically have loan-to-value covenants. So at this time, if the regulators from Ireland who took over the bank said, okay, I want to have appraisal of every loan in our U.S. portfolio, which we had lots and lots of loans, they would go out and we would get appraisal. And there's no chance anything was going to appraise at all in the portfolio because there's no market. There was a period where you could not give away anything. And so what happened was you were trying to negotiate our restructuring with Anglo, but you're also negotiating not only with the people here in the United States, the CEO of North America, and all the great people there, but you're also negotiating with the Irish government. And so, you went to Cornell, Ivy League school, you've done well, you're not used to, holy shit, like what's going, like, I gotta go to Ireland? Like, this it just is insane. Like, you couldn't, the stuff that you would think you'd read about in a book.
Yeah. One thing that's really key, going back to the friends and family capital, right? So we're fortunate, all of us, that our networks are great, and we had friends that went to Wall Street, did really well, had liquidity. So we were able to raise capital to buy our own notes back. So imagine, again, without getting too specific, a lender that was nationalized, that had some B notes on our properties, so a securitized piece. They couldn't sell the B note off. They got the A note out the door before the music stopped. So we were able to buy the B back for 15 to 20 cents on the dollar because we were able to access capital. We could pay that capital 15% when people were desperate for yield. So it was a complete win-win, but it would not have been happy times if we hadn't had that opportunity.
Right, and so what also happened, you had relationships with other of the large US-based banks. And so the US-based banks were also taking their medicine, and they look at you and they know you have a huge exposure to another bank. And they're like, okay, what's going to happen with their relationship with this particular bank? Because if that goes south, then you as the borrower, may be insolvent. And so how's that going to affect my other assets? So not only did the issues with Anglo go sideways, but then you had all the other banks who, once they realized how in bad shape they were, they then started focusing on us because not that our loans weren't performing with them, but what was happening in the greater portfolio. So it wasn't like we had 4 buildings and they get their arm around it. We have hundreds, and because of that, it became a daily exam on our business. And when you have the different lenders, that's when it became really relationship intensive.
So my PowerPoint skills are suspect here. This is supposed to be a video that's not playing, so we're just going to move right along, throw some more color photos at you.
So we have we have an organization that has a large construction and development component to it. So the property operators, our divisions that run the hotels, our divisions that run the retail, the office, the residential, they don't need to grow because they have their buildings that they show up every day and they manage. It limits their growth potential if you're not growing the building. But we had a construction development arm, and what were we going to do with these people? And they're very, very capable. We wanted to protect them because, again, as I said earlier, this is what differentiated us, and we knew that once things got better, it would continue to differentiate us. So we entered into several public-private partnerships. We own the land here in Chester, Pennsylvania, next to an office building. We bought the land defensively. We thought we'd build housing. Housing market blew up. The land was not worth what we paid for it. Major League Soccer came to us and said, hey, we want to build a soccer stadium here. We are in the process of building 2 off-ramps from I-95 here. It's a very, it's a poor community, Chester. That we figured that because there was a focus by the state of Pennsylvania to invest in this poor city and create a greater impact, we could raise the public dollars. But it's hard to feel, I think, as a real estate professional, as you all learn, because as my brother, who's our third partner, says, this is not a business where every day you're making widgets and it's easy. I mean, if you're not prepared for ups and downs that are severe, it's just not a business to be in. And so what happened was we had this one component of our company that we're working on restructuring all the debt that we have, and then we have another component that has to grow. So you're almost bipolar. Like, okay, we're going to grow, we're going to grow, we're going to grow, but we also have to make sure we don't lose our portfolio. And so the way that we were able to grow was there was no office deals being done, there was no apartment deals that were going to be done. So we stumbled upon, actually, in some ways luck, but the reason it was luck because we bought well-located property was we did a couple public-private partnerships. So we co-founded and we co-own the Philadelphia Union, which is a Major League Soccer team, and we developed the stadium. Another RFP was for the University of Delaware. They wanted to relocate their bookstore and their development office and the Starbucks and the small Apple retailing firm. So what we did was we responded to that RFP, we won, and we built that, and in a quick period of time, we turnkeyed it for them. So again, why we weren't doing work necessarily for ourselves in our traditional role. We were able to keep the people busy by doing the third-party stuff. We bought at the height of the market. We overpaid for 28 buildings in a stretch of area in downtown Wilmington, Delaware, that had great architecture but had been completely utilized. So the great thing about these 5 or 6 blocks that we built is the architecture is phenomenal. When you go to these town centers, every town center in America, what they were trying to do was to get the feeling of a place of what we had, but it was run down. So what we did was we bought the buildings. We bought them for the best possible price because the sellers were really not willing to sell. They weren't for sale. And what we did was, in order to make the numbers work, we went out and we got new market tax credits, historic tax credits, grants from foundations. And in order to get the people to come to the area, initially was we built a live music venue. Because music, we felt, was one of the ways that people will go to areas that are sketchy, that don't have traditional area. You want to go, you want to have a beer, you're going to listen to good music. You're not concerned that it's 57th and 5th Avenue in Manhattan. So we built an unbelievable live music center. It's operated by World Cafe Live. They have one at the University of Pennsylvania. And in order to get this built, it was a building that literally was crumbling. We created a not-for-profit, registered as a 501c3, got our certification. We own the building, so we created the foundation, we leased the building to the foundation, and then we went out and we raised $24 million to renovate only 40,000 square feet. It's critically acclaimed now live music venue, and it's been great for the city. We have a few hundred students in the challenged areas in the city come get music lessons, there's various seminars and concerts. So it's really become part of the community during the day, and at night it's an upscale live music venue. And now we're starting to build residential around there because all the residential that we renovated in the buildings that we acquired are all leased. And so now we'll start doing more traditional ground-up construction. And so we do all the work, and my brother, he gets the article in the New York Times about it. So we joke, we're not sure if he had ever gone to the building while it was under construction. And the picture was a little, he looked kind of like a poser. But it was it's been a great project. It's a project that will take twice as long to get our return out.
That was the Market Street block.
Yeah.
I was wondering, since it has very historic buildings and all that, how do you plan to add for your venue as such more space in terms of those particular buildings which have the historic, how do you plan to add value to it in terms of having those, assuming there must be issues with zoning and even preservation?
Well, what we did was the ground floor of these 6, 7 blocks was all really low-end retail. When there was retail, the majority of it was vacant. So, but you had these, I hate to use the word slumlords, but you had these slumlords that owned the building and didn't want to do anything with it. They just would pay vacant property fines. And so, in order to sell them, you had to pay premium dollars. The reason we were able to pay premium dollars is because there was a bubble in the economy, so that we were able to borrow money easier and at low, 2 to 3% money. So once we got our construction programs going, we realized the best way to try to get a return out of this was the upper 2, 3, 4 stories of all these buildings that had never been used in 50 years. So the ground floor might have been a retail tenant vacated, and the upper floors were just vacant. So I can't tell you how many pigeon carcasses were in there. It was vile. Like you literally, a lot of these buildings, before you could start construction, you had to go in with a hazmat team because there's so much just like, death in there. No humans, but animals. And it was gross. So we put a little group together in the office that really became excellent at wood frame construction and historic rehabilitation. We came up with a master plan of the area. Meanwhile, the construction clock was ticking on, construction loan clock was ticking. And we said, okay, we need $50 million in subsidies to rehab this whole area. So he said, okay, how are we going to get $50 million of subsidies? Well, it's a small town, they can't afford that. So we went to foundations, we went to the federal government, and we were able to get an allocation of new market tax credits, which is it's a great way to rehabilitate, I can talk about that later, as a question, rehabilitate buildings. Historic tax credits were great. We found the buyers for the historic tax credits. And then there was a $15–20 million gap after we raised all this money. So we came up with the idea called the Upstairs Fund. And so a couple of the analysts in our office, they said, okay, we need $30,000 or $25,000 subsidy per every residential unit that we build. So what we did is we put the study together saying to the city and the state, if you give us or any other developer $25,000 of real cash per deal, we'll waive all the abatements that would be in place. You can have a second mortgage on the property for 6 years to guarantee that we wouldn't flip these at a profit, and we flip these at a profit. You get all the profit first because we said we're going to be here for the long haul. And our investment strategy at the time was 7 years. And we showed them that based on the wage tax, the real estate tax increase, and permitting fees, that the payback on this $15 million would be 4.5 years. And so we were able to say, hey, you put this up, we'll renovate this corridor. And the reason they took us seriously and really focused on it is because it was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to control as much real estate. Then we went and we solicited other developers in Philadelphia to come down and to also take advantage of the program. So we actually created the Upstairs Fund, which was basically a subsidy per unit. And the reason we were able ultimately to do it was it's a great program, but we had a track record that we had showed in other markets or down the riverfront here that, listen, this is the amount of tax revenue that we created on these individual residential units, these retail units, and we used that historical model to project what the revenue was here. And so it's been, the city has now got all their money. It's beautiful, and other cities now are copying our Upstairs Fund. Very clever, because we want to renovate the upstairs with it. So.
And necessity is the mother of invention, as they say. So I would say under lessons learned, the first point is probably the key one to remember. When revenue goes down 30% and capital markets seize up, whatever your worst case underwriting was is not worst case enough. So hopefully that we don't, as an industry, go through that again.
After the TARP in 2008, if you all remember, the stock market went down 1,000 points, and that year after, our hotel revenue decreased. How many percent was it, Dave?
22.
Yeah, 22. And after September 11th, when you had planes, crashing into buildings, people dying, it was horrific. And I lived in New York City at the time. How much did it? 6%, I think, for 3 months.
I think it was more like 3.5.
Yeah, 3.5
across the portfolio.
So historic averages showed like a terrible decrease in revenue in a hotel would be 3%, 4%.
Yeah.
And so what we had was it was never projected. And if you ever projected a worst case scenario, I'm going to lose 22% revenue, you just would never do any project. It just wouldn't ever happen.
Yeah, and the third point too. So you have good projects, right? You have some troubled lenders, like most of them. But even the lenders that weren't in danger of being nationalized or going bankrupt were flipping out, and they wouldn't extend loans. And if you needed money for tenant improvements, to create value for the asset that they were collateral, that was collateral for their loan. It was really an interesting, frustrating time. Having gone through that, I wouldn't recommend it to anybody, but we did certainly learn a lot of lessons. And you learned about the culture of the institution. I would just say, if I had to do a blanket statement, the regional banks, the community banks, the people that are resident in your market, they got it, and they stayed the course, and they'd even advance further dollars. But when you have national or larger regional banks or international banks, certainly, you are subject to the direction the wind is blowing, my friends. And
I don't
it's
think
good sometimes.
We never assumed that there'd be a scenario where you could pay your mortgage and have cash flow left over, and the lender still be hammering you to pay them off because of loan to value. That just wasn't something that we ever contemplated. So, you think you pay your mortgage, you have money left over, you really want me to pay you off? And who's going to pay off? There's no one out there to lend. So, and the other thing is, relationships in this business change a lot because a lot of Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, a lot of the banks that we dealt with were no longer. And then if you were at a bank, a lot of the loans just got transferred to a new group. It might have been, you know, a relationship that was in Philadelphia, the relationship that transferred to Chicago because of all the consolidation. So you didn't know often any of the people, so the whole relationship model went out the door. And you know, it was hand-to-hand combat.
I wonder if we say Bear Stearns, people are like, is that Oldsmobile? Like, what is that? Like, I just wonder how relevant it is.
Yeah.
So you got to talk about the third from the bottom, about public money is hard to actually get.
Yeah. So,
From the slides and from the talk, I have understand how you get from the hotel into non-hotel industry. And but I was wondering, you know, for investment, keeping portfolio diversified is a good thing always. But for as a developer who feeds your own construction company, do you ever think your portfolio or probably is too much diversified, or have you ever considered to make a specialization?
yeah, you know, it's funny. The problem with having diversification means you always have an asset class that's challenged, right? So if we did hotels all the time, you know, there's times in the hotel where. Now, I think the office market still is challenging, and that's an asset class that we're still working very intently to figure out, you know, what's going to happen over the next 2 years in our market, you know, Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland. And the reason is, one, people aren't hiring like they used to, so there's just less people in the workforce, which means less. The second item is when tenants lease space now, they put so many more people in the same amount of space. So we have at least, we'll show a slide where we built a building, we sold a building, and we're doing the construction to JP Morgan. There was a financial service firm that was in the space before. They had about 300 to 350 people. The financial service firm was sold to Bank of America. The building was vacant. We bought the building. We sold the building to JP Morgan. We're doing construction, building a garage. JP Morgan will put 850 people into this building. So what's happening is users now need far less space to house their employees. And it's not because people are telecommuting, it's just that there's more efficient ways that offices are open. So we are not bullish right now on the office market in any of the markets. So that's an asset class that we're less focused on. We bid on an office building yesterday, and we would only buy the office building if we could get it like the cheapest of the cheap. And because we think, you know, you still have several more years of job growth. So not only do you have to get the pre-recession job growth, but everyone's restacking, and so you have to get, you know, to 5% more employment before all the space is used. Now the good news is there's very little office product being built in our markets. You know, in New York City you have all the stuff down the World Trade Center. So that's an asset class that we, you know, are less focused on. Retail is an asset class that is really tertiary to our mixed-use projects. So I think going forward, we'll continue to focus on residential for lease, and we're changing the way that we build apartments because we talked about this earlier today at lunch. People today, they don't need the big apartment anymore. They want great common spaces. They want to be well located. They want to be have a feeling of community, so community rooms, pools.
You're stealing your own thunder.
Yeah, that's important, and so that's how we'll change our.
I just want to address that too. We do feel like we're sharpshooters in different asset classes because, for example, the hotel co and the office management company, different offices. We use different insurance agents.
Yeah.
We're on different incentive plans, different payroll companies. Like, it literally is separate.
Yeah.
So
if Dave were to get hit by a bus tomorrow, you know, I don't know if we
buy my stock.
Yeah, if we probably wouldn't grow the hotel business, and I think vice versa.
Does anyone want to know what mistakes we didn't make during that cycle? Because I can't really think of it. Sorry.
I heard you say you're going to remain focused on residential. I'm wondering, do you feel any pressure to sell existing assets now, given sort of the incredible price of the market?
Yeah, we think about that all the time. What we'll do is we'll buy out some of our partners that we have in our existing deals. We'll probably sell a couple of the residential deals, but you know, we don't think that the cap rates will change a whole lot over the next 2 years. and rents are going up. So if we can increase rents $50 a year per unit per month, the multiple that we'll get in 2 years when we go to sell versus a day, we think is worth the risk. They all have great cash flow. We just refinanced a building. We got a 40-year, full 4-year term, 4-year amortization at 3.42%. So what's happening now is the rates are so low that when you look at keeping the asset with your tax depreciation, interest deduction, versus selling it and the capital gains, and then where are you going to put the money, right? So you get this money back. It's hard. Deals are hard to come by because you're not going to do many office building deals now because there's no demand. And how many more residential buildings do you want to build right now? Just because you have to be concerned there's a bubble there. So it's really been nice to refinance everything in the 3%, 3.5% range, keep the property, have great cash flow, and think that the asset's increasing in value. And that asset class showed very little. I mean, there was a period for 6 months where you couldn't sell an apartment, but that asset class, the cap rates of through the recession stayed pretty consistent. You look at a couple things. One, the allocation by pension funds and money managers and hedge funds on what they're looking to do. There's so much money there. And in our markets, there is very little, with the exception of downtown Washington, D.C., there's not a huge amount of new product being built. So even in Philly, where we're looking around, there's 10 projects that are being built, but none of them are 500 units. They're 250. And you look at the historical absorption. So we think based on, you talk to the funds out there that have allocated money over the next couple of years, and you look at what the rent growth is going to be, even if cap rates do go up, we think that the rent growth that is, we think, built in, because you have people that are coming off of leases that may be under market, that you'll be able to roll up at a higher rate, that we think that would offset any change in the cap rate.
There's also a correlation between interest rates and cap rates, as you know, and we do network and talk a lot, and our friends that trade bonds and our hedge fund managers, they're long on rates staying low. That doesn't mean they're right, but they've been right throughout the cycles. They predicted everything. They were flipping out in 2007, and we're like, everything's great. What's the problem? Like literally, these guys were under the desk waiting for the bomb to hit, and they were right.
But so like today, like the 10-year got to 1.98%. So people are freaking. Oh my God, the 10 years at 1.98. Like it's a joke. Like it was at 180 a couple weeks ago, a month ago, and you're like 20 basis points. It's so low that even if it went up 50 basis points or went up 75 basis points, it's ridiculous. You shouldn't be able to borrow at 3.42% for 40 years. It's just so we assume that rates are going to go up, but I don't think they're going to go up. They're not going to double. Yeah. If they go up 75 basis points, you're still in great shape. So.
How do you finance your different assets that you try to set up the hotels and go to direction roads? How do you finance them?
That's actually what this next couple slides are about, is what we're doing now. I think this is pretty relevant in today's world, and obviously, maybe there's an opportunity to work with you guys on some of these things, or going forward on the next projects in the cycle. So I don't mean to stop you there. Please re-ask the question if we don't hit it. So we built a lot of hotels. We did it with high leverage. Tough times resulted. So what are we doing now? Well, we just had the perfect laboratory. Imagine if you could run a project through the laboratory of how would it have done during the Great Recession. So we have that now, and we know what happened with demand. Smith Travel Research in the hotel world and Real Capital Analytics. I mean, there's great data out there. So we actually know what will happen if times are really, really bad. So that means we're doing central business district development only, keeping the leverage low, no more than 65% on new development hotels. Obviously, those are on the outer edge of the risk spectrum, new construction hotels. It doesn't get more spec than that, right? We're using a lot of institutional equity as opposed to friends and family. We are differentiated. So one of the other things that we discovered coming out of the cycles is that Embassy Suites, for example, is a great hotel brand for a lot of reasons. But one example is in a downturn, the bundled offering of a cooked-to-order breakfast, the evening manager's reception with the free drinks. That creates preference and drives RevPAR index in the hotel world. So we know that if there's another cycle, and guess what, there probably will be, we want to be in differentiated product. Again, just between us, I always tell the joke, and I hope I don't offend anybody here, that Embassy Suites is the official brand of the functioning alcoholic, because those two drinks are not optional for a lot of people, and their company's not paying for them, so they're going to go to the Embassy Suites. And I don't know that you can take that segment, and grow it over the years or not, but people just love that brand. So we're focusing on things like that. Although with one exception, a Hampton Inn and Suites is a terrific offering in the marketplace, and it goes to all traveling segments. The family going to Disney World, the individual business traveler. So we love that brand. We have two going. We work the brands hard, because if they want us to build their brand, then they're going to have to participate. And the bottom line is really the key one. We are not going to build any hotels. We're not breaking ground after 2013. Land costs are lower. Construction costs haven't fully come back. We think construction costs went down about 30% peak to trough, and they're back up about a third of that. So now we're getting about a 20% discount from peak construction costs. So no way are we going to be breaking ground in 2016 on something, because then you open at the back end of the cycle. It's just wrong on every level. So here are the projects that we have underway right now. The first two are actually under construction. The third one will be this month, God willing. And then the next two will be in ground towards the second half of the year. But I just want to rip through some of these just to let you guys know why we're doing it, what we're thinking, what's different from the last time. What would I recommend you do if you're going to do a hotel deal? Well, Manhattan's got pretty high barriers to entry. Not that people can't and don't develop there. They are, and they will. But it's a lot harder to do that, and you certainly are not going to be building 1,000-room hotels anytime in the near future. Maybe there will be a convention center hotel, but you guys get my point. So this one's on 37th between 8th and 9th, so it's an emerging part of the city. The site is 100 by 100 parking lot. Used to be, it's owned by the same family since the Civil War. So what do you think you pay for 100 feet by 100 feet in Midtown? I'm going to tell you we stole it. It was $20.8 million for 10,000 square feet. And the reason we stole it is because there's a lot of FAR, floor area ratio, available. So we could actually build a pretty big building, and we could actually build a real lobby. So 100 by 100, you can actually have like a big desk, and you could have like a breakfast area you're proud of. And a lot of the hotels that have been built recently are 50-footers, so narrow. You walk in, there's a big column in front of you. So we feel like we'll be able to provide a really nice product. The thesis is differentiated. It's extended stay. The second Residence Inn just opened in Manhattan, too, in all of Manhattan. It will be the first, and so far, the only Homewood in development. So this one's going to open right before the Super Bowl. We actually accelerated construction to get open in that time. And you can see how we capitalized it. So yes, we're taking some risk, but we're sharing guarantees with our institutional partner. They're putting up most of the money, and the leverage is low. So we have a pretty good shock absorber built into this one.
And one of the things we did is
It's obviously that.
Yeah. One of the things we did is we ran the numbers when we closed on this. Okay, forget about revenue growth, which is happening in Manhattan. What happens when revenue decreases like it did in 08, 09, 10? So you have that model built in so that, okay, this is what's going to happen if we go through another Great Recession.
I just love construction. It's like the fun part of the job. If I could just sit out there and watch the crane swing all day. Westin Wilmington. So this thesis is different. Wilmington's not a market where you would go build a market hotel. In other words, it wouldn't support it. The development costs would not be supported by the revenue and the resulting NOI. So the substantial public investment is what got this one done. We love this market. We know this market. We know the demand generators. Rob went to school with all of them. And so we'll be able to put some business in there. We'll be the new differentiated product. But again, the public support was the one that made this feasible, and which gets us pretty excited. And we've got a really nice basis and a great new full-service hotel, which will be differentiated because it's new and it's 4-star, or modern luxury as they call it, in a market that hasn't seen new supply in a long time. So this one's under construction now. Nothing like a visual. This is the site here, and it's adjacent to the city's convention center. It's in the Riverfront District. You guys saw a photo of it earlier, but here it is now. We're actually erecting steel, and up we go. I mentioned Hampton Inn and Suites. This one's a little bit off thesis. It's a legacy project. And again, in your career, this will probably happen to you. So we bought the land in '06, took a couple years to entitle it, and then we actually were at closing twice, and both times the bank blew up, if you can believe that.
Literally
So,
went out of business.
yeah, so luckily we did not close.
You believe it happens once, but you're like, God, how could this happen again? Like, you know,
Yeah.
what did I do? God's punishing me.
Yeah, so this is the 6-year project, and I think everyone's familiar with how these look. That actually is not it. We're gonna get
But we
to that.
wouldn't do that today.
We would not buy suburban land today. This one is going to break ground later this year. Again, Hampton Inn and Suites, just a terrific brand. You can see again how we capitalized it. The idea being that it'll be able to ride out cycles. It's an emerging part of the city. That is the Washington Nationals baseball stadium, Anacostia, Potomac. EPA is here. Lots of good stuff happening down in this
And what
market.
happens is, in these deals, and you all probably have studied this, is we may have a minority of equity in it, but you know, the managing member, and then you get a disproportionate share of the profit once you hit a certain return threshold. So it might be an 8, it might be a 12, it might be a 16. So there's incentive to really do well.
Roof deck up here overlooking the baseball stadium. So again, trying to find some compelling characteristics that differentiate us. So from the 5th floor on up, you're looking right into the baseball diamond. And it should be a
The
lot
thing
of
about the
fun.
Westin too is it's a friend of ours from Cornell who is our equity partner, and so it's we've done 3 hotels prior to that with Scott. We bought him out of all 3. We still own them, so it's been great for him. And so that relationship is what allowed us to get that slug of equity in a market. When we built 2 hotels out in DC, we did it at the bottom of the trough. Things were coming up, and so we went to Scott. We said, "Listen, Scott, this is just like 2000, the end of 2001, beginning of 2002. We want to do this again." We were successful. You had to come to the property, I think, once, and he had a 20% IRR, and so that's how we were able to get that property going in a secondary market where there's really very little hotel construction in any secondary markets.
So if you loved $20.8 million for 10,000 square feet, you would really love $40 million for about 9,000 square feet, which is this land, which we closed on in December. Last deal for this cycle, I talked about Embassy Suites, but I can't help myself. I love pictures. I love plans, so bear with me. This one actually is interesting. It has a back to it, so you actually have to design 2 facades, which is twice as much fun.
And so the difference is a lot of other buildings in Manhattan, you're going to have a lot of extra construction costs because you have all the facades that you're building. So,
Yeah.
while it's great for views and it'll be great for revenue per room, it's not great for construction costs.
Roof deck. I'm liking it. And then we focused on the third party, which I manage. So which I mentioned. So we now manage 3 hotels for institutional owners, and we are expecting to pick up several more. So we'll be able to apply the investments that we made into our management company and hopefully drive some returns, hire some smarter people, and continue to grow the management side.
Dave, one of the things that Dave said about smart people is what amazes us is how much more sophisticated the people are in our business, the young people. Everywhere we go now, and I see that, it reminds me if I was younger that I just no way could have had a job in our industry just because everyone understands the analytical side so well. And it's really, for me, the real estate business has really caught up with the investment banking business where everyone is so bright and so capable, and there's no easy deal anymore. Every deal is incredibly scrutinized and by all the parties. So as the office market does not improve, we have these mixed-use developments. Their residential and retail components did relatively well in the downturn. We need to focus on how do we continue the momentum of these large mixed-use projects. And one of the things that we did in the Riverfront Development Project is we built a 15-screen IMAX. We just said, hey, my brother said, we really need a movie theater down here. That's the extent of the idea. We've been in other markets where there's lots of residential, what would do well, and we thought movie theater, high-end movie theater would do well. We knew some people who operated one in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. We brought them down after a year of begging for them to come look at the site. they came down like, wow, this is great. There's only a few people that do feasibility studies in the theater world. There's not very many new movie theaters being built, thanks to the 60-inch flat screens. And we got that study. We determined that it made sense to do this. And we went out, and it took us about a year to get a construction loan, a low leverage 65% construction loan, and then we were able to build that. And we had to build the building at 70,000 square feet, and we built it in 5 months because we wanted to be open in time for the holiday movie theater season this past year.
So we have about 10 minutes left. If you want to just
other things that we're doing. This is Bloom Energy, which is a fuel cell company. They are out of California. They came to us, and again, this is just very typical of a weak market or a descending market, is whatever you think the deal is going to be, it ends up completely different. So this is a deal that we pitched our services as a fee developer about a year ago. It's at the University of Delaware. They bought an old Chrysler plant. They demolished the Chrysler plant. They hired a land planning firm to lay this out. One of the tenants that they were able to get on a long-term land lease was Bloom Energy. They made this is their East Coast headquarters, and we originally pitched for be a fee developer. They stopped returning our calls. We said, okay, the deal died out of the blue. We get a call, hey, we're getting ready to start construction. Are you interested? We come in, we say, okay, that's great. They want us to do a build and lease back for them. We finish the plans, and meanwhile, the start date they had to have this building open because they're installing these large fuel cells, and they needed the manufacturing capacity, and they needed it right away. So what happened was the construction time frame that we had to build was 7 months. So the end date never changed from when we first met them. It's just the start date changed. So we had, as I call, we had a firm handshake on a deal, and we started construction on the project. We had all the steel up before we signed any agreement. Now, again, slightly nuts, but that was the only way to work it. And you had enough emails going back and forth that, God forbid, if this ended up in a pissing match, you sort of recovered, but really not ideal. And as we're about to close the loan, Bloom came to us and said, you know what, your cost of capital, because of our profit in the lease, it's too high. We don't want you to own the building anymore. And we're like, well, that wasn't the deal. And so we had the heart-to-heart with them, and we structured a way around that it made sense for us economically to be the fee developer here. And so we'll be done the project in May, June, and we started in end of November. Yeah. This is Bank of America had excess surplus land, and this is again our new thesis is lower leverage and space that's very marketable, that's in well-located corridors. We bought this building, and Bank of America vacated to 550,000 square feet, and we scrambled, and we've leased almost everything up to Barclays Bank, Chase, Sallie Mae, Coventry Healthcare. And the reason we were able to do this is, again, alluded to earlier on, we had leases signed with 1 or 2 pages of documentation from a construction standpoint, where JP Morgan said, listen, I need this building built, I need you to demolish how this building connects to another building, and where you demolish that building, I need you to build a parking garage. I need everything done in 8 months. And so in today's world, the end dates never change, but because capital is so scarce that every firm you deal with, for them to pull the trigger, it just takes far longer. And so what happens is it's just brutal on your construction and development folks. So here we closed in December on the sale of this part of the office park to JP Morgan, and the day after we closed, we had completed all the piles in the ground for the parking garage. So if they had walked away, we would have been liable for about $1.5 million of subsurface foundations. That's the garage that we designed it. And then this is an apartment building. It's where we have other apartments. And again, the difference here is versus the other product is the units will be smaller, the common areas will be bigger, and it'll be as many residential. It'll have more of a hotel feel to it.
So last slide, guys, and thanks for letting us grind through this. Hopefully you picked up one or two interesting tidbits, per section. But this is the live information that I wanted to make sure you guys were getting a snapshot of the market that we experience. Everyone's doing different things in real estate, but based on our Mid-Atlantic and the asset classes that we're focused on, and the part of the value cycle that we focus on, which is development and value add, this is what's happening right now. And the second point that's interesting on lessons learned is that the investors want to get stuff done because they're getting 20 basis points in their savings account or their CDs, or you get 1.9% interest if you're lucky on a 10-year treasury. And it's just really not good enough. So it's forcing people into higher parts of the risk spectrum, which means that capital is more available for real estate than the strategy we've talked about quite a bit. But would welcome any questions, and we can certainly go back if there's a.
The question right here is the first year. Just this past weekend, I did a sustainability audit at a hotel in New York City, and one of the questions that we're trying to answer is how does that play between the ownership group versus the operator? Who do you see is responsible for sustainability, and then what is just within your own development projects? What is your view of sustainability?
Well, on the hotel side, then Rob can speak to the other food groups. On the hotel side, we're building LEED right now, and recycling started on the West Coast where I grew up, and so I was probably recycling before people on the East Coast knew what it was. But what's happening there, my point is it's a bellwether, is that a lot of the public entities, municipal, state government, even federal government agencies out there, they won't choose a hotel for a meeting unless it is LEED certified, has sustainable practices, et cetera, et cetera. So we know it's coming. Now, newsflash, everyone else knows it's coming too. But when we design the hotels that are in our development cycle now, LEED Silver is a minimum goal for us. And then on the operating side, without spending too much time on it, we have a very dynamic energy and sustainability committee. So right now, we're doing fuel cells, we've done solar installations, we're using solar film on our buildings. Obviously, the operating practices are sustainable. So if you came to me and said, I want to have a meeting at your Hilton Hotel at BW Airport, for example, I can tell you what the impact will be in terms of carbon footprint. But if you said, well, what if I had chicken instead of steak? I'm like, well, then you've lowered your carbon footprint by 2%. So people are focusing on it. I don't think the mainstream is yet. Like, I don't think GM's thinking about that, but a lot of travelers and a lot of groups are thinking about it.
Yeah, now from the office standpoint, the RFP that you respond to for the tenant that wants at least 25,000 square feet, 50, 100, 200,000, they all want LEED. And you respond to it, you might be selected, you go back and forth on the negotiation, and then they need to be at a $22 square foot rent, you're at 24, and they say, well, how do you get to 22? We say, well, let's take care of all the LEED stuff. And they're like, okay, fuck it, let's do LEED. But let's do it without the LEED, right? They're like, at the end of the day, everyone in the office sector is driven by price. So they're not going to pay a $2 premium to go to LEED. At least the businesses that we deal with. The GSA may, some of these companies, Apple, companies that have just profited so much and their margins haven't been cut. But what we find is, at the end of the day, we want to do LEED, but that goes out the door because they're more focused on earnings. So what happened though is, while we're not getting the certification on the office side, we are really starting to implement all of the practices from a mechanical side. So the technology's gotten so much better that it actually now is profitable for us to put in new systems that run the HVAC system, new water management systems, solar in areas like New Jersey where there's huge subsidies that make sense. And like we just did an apartment building where we spent $250,000 to upgrade the energy management system. We put variable speed drives on the mechanical piping systems versus just a regular drive. And that $250,000 resulted in an 18-month payback. And so basically in 18 months, we saved in our energy bill that $250,000 that we spent. And so we did that not because we have this, we're going for a green standard on an existing building. We did that because our electric bill's going to go down, whatever that is, $15,000 a month or so. And you cap that at a 6 cap, that's really profitable. And by the way, it's great for the environment. But really what we find in our markets, the lead in the office goes out the door because of price. 9 out of 10 times, not all the time. And then in the residential, I don't know if people outside our industry fully grasp the fact that you're LEED certified or not LEED certified. What they do grasp is the fact that you're making the effort to be more green, through the recycling, through things that you can market, water management system. Like what we do in our office buildings, and we did this as a necessity in 2009, 2010, when tenants were blowing up and revenue was going down. Your vacancy went from 90, your occupancy went from 92% to 82%. We would start at peak load times, just turn all the lights off, other than the emergency lights, throughout all the common areas of our portfolio. And we said, and it's true, we said to all of our occupants, this is a green initiative, and it's also going to save you money. So people, 10 years ago, they wouldn't have liked when you walked in the lobby of your building, maybe 7 times during the summer, all the lights were off other than the emergency lights. But now they're understanding of that. They're also understanding that in a lot of municipalities, it costs more to recycle. So when you send them their CAM bill, their cost is going up. But a lot of people now, they feel guilty if you don't throw your paper out in the recycling bin. So I think from the LEED is going to be a lot easier because the technology has gotten so much better from the mechanical side, and the window films and solar. But I think we're still several years away from it being cost effective. Now there's some municipalities, like if you want a building permit, you have to build LEED. But
by the way, if you guys haven't talked about it in class or heard about it, there's been a prediction that LEED won't exist in 10 years. That's a whole other subject. You have to invite me back next Thursday. I'll tell you about that.
Because there's a frustration. It might cost you $200,000 to LEED certify the building. You really want to spend that $200,000 to get that stamp. What is it worth? But if we do 90% of that, and then we take that extra $200,000 and we give it as a rent credit to get the tenant in, so you actually build the building, or you spend that in the lobby furniture, something like that.
All right, so we have a question for you guys. If you have to choose between being a developer, working in finance, or other, leasing broker or other services, so who wants to be a developer of those 3 choices? Wow, you guys didn't learn anything? All right, what about financial services? Couple. And then other, design or leasing or, got it. So development it is, I guess. Anyway, any other questions? Please.
I don't know if I have an answer to this question, but in purposely look at different loan products for the different types of assets, or do you just kind of try to get whatever that you can get from the lenders?
Term is really important right now. So any non-recourse, it's project specific. We want as much term as possible. We won't do we try not to do any 5-year loans because how much lower can interest rates be? We do think there's going to be, again, some spike in interest rates. Even if it's 50 basis points, you better lock it in today. Obviously, non-recourse is critical, and leverage is important, but we don't want the leverage that we used to have. And you can't actually get that leverage anyway. People are a lot more disciplined.
I'm going to answer it slightly differently. Yeah. So you've got CMBS, you've got balance sheet lenders, whether it's local or Deutsche Bank's balance sheet, big balance sheet. Then you've got kind of specialty lenders, the NXTs and Mesa West. Anyway, it was very different until about a year ago. Most people wouldn't think about hotels. They just felt they were too risky. And I don't know what changed other than the fact that greed overcame fear, and now they're back in the hotel space. So I don't think there's a real difference today in LTVs and debt service coverage ratios between the various asset classes, with the exception of residential, based on the loan that Rob described, 3.42% for 40-year, is the special space.
But our investment committee, when you vote on a loan, the parameters are, the same for office or retail or hotel. Now, residential is, that's the outlier.
Yes, sir.
I ask all of our guests the same question, so you'll be no different. When you have spare time, if you have spare time, what kinds of things do you like to read?
I just finished Heads in Beds, which is kind of a tell-all memoir about the hotel industry, and it was terrific. It's like eating a cupcake. It goes away after a while, but you enjoy it while you're eating it. I thought that was really fun. But honestly, I would say that the last couple of years, there's that building High Rise that came out. There's just been some interesting books about the hotel and the real estate industry. And the thing I thought really captured the essence of being a developer was A Man in Full, which Tom Wolfe wrote. And if you haven't read that one, I thought it was terrifically entertaining. There's not a great body of literature about real estate.
We read a lot of children's books because we have young children. So usually every night I fall asleep reading it.
Good night.
Children, yeah, exactly. And I have a 6-year-old who's just learning to read, so that's we're reading some very basic books right now. I'll tell you, it's a great book, which many of you probably read, is the Steve Jobs book. I really enjoyed that. I just finished that book. And that took a while to read, just between.
What are you reading?
Right now, nothing.
Yeah.
I'm looking for recommendations.
Yeah, if you haven't, I'd recommend the Steve Jobs book. I mean, I think in our business where you have to be obsessed with detail, it was interesting to see how someone who's such a great business person obsessed over that. So, that's all right.
Just a very quick question. Why the website of BBG has an and with .net instead of .com?
Because .com was taken. We wanted .com. We wanted bpg.com, but it was taken. I forgot who had it. We could have probably bought it for $100.
Yeah.
But someone had taken it, and then so we went. It was the best we could do.
Yeah, it's really true.
In development, do you differentiate for projects that you would like to exit, or probably you just plan and keep projects and retain that?
Well, there's a discipline that's brought to the industry by institutional partners. So Rob alluded to it before. Several of the projects that we did with Westport Capital, where our friend Scott Chernoff is, who's class of '88, just a super guy, he exited, we stayed. And we think in the future, if there's institutional capital involved, we're going to go when they go, because they're pretty smart, and there's nothing wrong with taking a profit. Now, I hope, as a tail, I can leave my management company in there. So that's going to be the Rubicon we try to cross over the next few years.
But yeah, I mean, I think internally we have maybe 20 buildings of the 100 buildings that we own that we'd like to have, long term, because we don't think that the lease expiration or functional design of the building over the next 20 years is a negative thing. So we have identified certain buildings that we just wouldn't sell. Listen, if you got the right price, there's nothing for sale. But they're great buildings. They generate great cash flow, and in the worst case scenario, these buildings are able to feed our machine. And then the buildings in New York City will, we'll probably have offers at the beginning of next year on the first hotel.
Yeah. By the way, we sold that one, and we sold that one. So, the iconic images, on our PowerPoint scan. So, it's truer now than it's been that we'll sell stuff. Yes, Ricardo.
In your expansion in the future, would you rather to partner with private investors more or with institutional investors?
About half our deals now are just ourselves and the principals of our company, and then the high net worth people that we've been doing business with. And it's a lot easier to do a transaction when you have a lot more of the deal. And a lot of the money that gets reinvested in our company is money that we made for the high net worth people over the years. So you may return the money to them, and then they'll say, okay, I'll wire you back another project. So that's the easiest. And typically we own the majority of those assets. That's probably maybe a little bit more than half our assets. So that's and that money is the least costly money. Where you start dealing with the private equity model or or AIG or some of the pension funds, it's much more expensive, and the reporting requirements are much more rigorous. Now, the flip side of that is you really raise your, not that we don't put the same effort for everything, but when you have a reporting requirement, every 3 weeks, you're probably going to be a little bit more focused on the operations. I don't necessarily think the outcome's any different. I think we get the same return for ourselves with or without an institutional partner, but you're probably more focused on a weekly basis on the return. How's this performing versus pro forma when you have an institutional partner.
So, quick addition to that. The legal bill on that hotel in New York, $100 million, the first hotel, the $20.8 million site. The legal bill was $1 million because there's 20 entities that have to perform in the structure. That's just the worst, least productive use of capital possible. Unless you're an attorney, in which case it's like, well, of course you've got to have every thing documented perfectly and it's the structure. But at the end of the day, it's going to cost what it costs to build. It's going to be done when it's done. We're going to operate it, and the thing will do as well as it's going to do. So I just wasted money.
The other thing is, real estate developers are very entrepreneurial, and it's something that I think we learned along the way. When you have an institutional partner, you're in many days the employee because you operate the building, you know everything that's happening in that hotel that happened this month. The institutional partner, they may check in once a month, once every 6 months, but when they check in, they're grilling you with questions. So you have to respond, and if your responses and your information isn't done properly, you'll get, they'll be disappointed. So they're while your partners, because you're responsible for ultimately what happens on an asset, a lot of days you feel like, you're the employee, which is not a bad thing. It's actually, a good thing because it causes you to raise your game a little bit, and you certainly never, lie on your laurels. So.
I don't want to stand between this group and happy hour any more than we are, but
okay.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? And certainly we can continue conversation over the reception, but anything else for the time being? Okay, well, first of all, congratulations on a partnership that's standing the test of time. You've done very well together, and that's terrific to hear, and you've done some very sophisticated things. And thanks for giving us a great seminar today. It's a great experience for us.
Thanks very much.
Everybody over at the Regent Lounge shortly.
And the question is, where did we get the color for our logo? If you can figure that. Oh, you have to over a beer. You have to answer it over.